So, who needs plot? Just steal from the 16th century. Oh, is anyone a forever DM? Okay, good. We're here to help you. We thought of you for this. All right, so, as I said earlier, but I'm going to say again, although we have official and factual historians here and out there, we encourage everyone to do their own research to fact check, mostly me, and maybe even find more cool information to share. The information in this panel is inspired by actual history with flavorings from historical fiction, such as TV shows, video games, movies, music, more. Because we're here for D&D. We're here for tabletop. And it just so happens it's 1 century. Okay, if you're like me and hate to do research, like Google's anything, something will pop up. You could steal it for almost any campaign you're making. Okay, so who are we up here? So we're part of Reframe. So what we do is panels that are focused on educational and entertaining content. We're currently like reshuffling everything, so I don't have like, like all the, hey, follow us on blankety blank, because of the pandemic. But what we're doing is the same thing. We show up, we have fun, and apparently we get recognized in like the most random places. Oh, musical Friends. Anyone knows Be More Chill? Okay, we were at the final showing, like in New York, and I posted on Instagram, oh, we're at Be More Chill. Someone ran up to us. They're like, you're Reframe. And I was like, God, we're famous. I felt so empowered, but yeah. So, who are we? I'm Lodestar. I was the first certified geek therapist, which is a real thing. I'm a former captain of a world-class competition team. They were not world-class when I was captain of them. But everyone says, oh my God, you competed in Worlds? I did not, but sure, fine, if that's what you assume. I'm an award-winning choreographer. All my awards given to me by my students. So nothing special, but I love them. Oh, and I believe that Wendy Williams and Kathy Griffin were right about everything they ever claimed. Over here, this is Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz.
Liz holds a degree in anthropology.
Not that I use it, but I wish I did.
You used it to make this.
Truth.
Loves historical literature so much she made herself a living piece of Jane Austen herstory. Murdered a lobster in 1999.
It was the time I learned about mortality. I was like 5. I wanted a lobster at Red Lobster. I was like, that one. And then it came out. Traumatic.
Lived in Broadway, Virginia.
Not that Broadway.
But it was like, what? Broadway? Oh. Over there, that's Mulana. She is a historian, has a degree in it and everything. Is basically our fact checker, but feel free to also fact check us. This is a very, very collaborative time, people. Can recite random monologues from random places. Has a godlike hearing ear. Oh my God, to measure this God hearing. So I was playing Final Fantasy VII's remake, right? And at that same time, I was watching Teen Wolf for the first time. From 2 rooms away, she's like, why are you watching Teen Wolf right now? I'm like, what? And we looked up all the voice actors. Half the cast of Teen Wolf was in the Final Fantasy remake. And is an excellent judge at children's competitions. Gives great feedback. If you ever need a judge, let us know. Sadly, Nick could not be here, but Nick was here. And he held a degree in political science, loves hockey, former drummer, was just happy to be here, but I'm not. And generally does not care what your star sign is. I love your star sign, so. Okay, so today we're going to go over our hot spots of history in the 16th century. So we're going over the Americas, England, the Ottoman Empire, Japan, and Aztec, Inca world. Excuse me. All right, so let's just kick off. Okay, so I fully believe to understand the Tudor dynasty in the 16th century, you kind of have to go back further. So between 1455 to 1487, that was the War of the Roses, which is known as the Cousins' War, because like I was saying earlier before we started, these people were all related. Everyone was a second cousin, and everyone had the same name. They were all Johns, Marys, Annes, Elizabeths, Edwards,
Margaret's.
James, Margaret's.
Yep.
There was one Arthur. Yeah, Edwards.
Edward. Yeah. Richard.
Henry, that's the other big one. Thank you.
How could you forget Henry?
Because I'm not thinking of Tudor. I'm thinking of Henry came a lot later, too.
No, he did not. There are still Henrys back then.
Yeah.
Yes.
But also, for those who didn't know, which you guys have already proven you know a ton about history, War of the Roses inspired the entire plot of Game of Thrones. Yeah, we're going to dive into that. So, because War of the Roses is technically pre-16th century, and you kind of have to understand how everything else happened. So, England was ruled by the Plantagenet family, who was divided amongst who should rule England. Lancasters or Yorks were the two main sides of the Plantagenet family. Lannisters and Starks, for those in the Game of Thrones. And basically, it started because England lost the 100 Years' War with France over a tiny piece of land known as Calais, which, if you Google Calais, the photos, it's really just a kind of like a pretty field. If you have ever been to Calais, please let me know. I would love to know what's there and what's so valuable about it other than just location. And fun fact, Joan of Arc was a French martyr during the 100 Years' War. Something that I randomly found out was involved in all this. I had no clue Joan of Arc was this time period.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So someone I like to highlight from the War of the Roses is Jacquetta of Luxembourg. So she's one of the most interesting women in English history, and almost nothing is known about this lady. But, so when she was of marrying age, she was married to the person that was sent from England to be in charge of France. So she kind of became like a queen of some sort, but not entirely, of like the English territory of France. But he was way older than her, and then he died. And then, so they were, because back then, you know, kings got to decide who you married. So they were trying to figure out what's her next step in life. She's so young, she's ready to go, she doesn't have kids, but she married his squire. And they loved each other, and they almost like got killed for it, apparently. But they convinced each other, like the king at the time, which was Henry the Seventh? No, Sixth. So many Henrys.
A Henry.
Yeah, a Henry.
Six.
They convinced a Henry that was the king.
Six, I think.
Yeah, it was a sixth because it was Margaret of Anjou's like husband. So they convinced Henry the Sixth. They were really in love. It's going to be great, and spared them. And then she had 14 kids. Yeah. 14, and they were devoted to the Lancaster side of the War of the Roses until her oldest daughter became a widow and married the leader of the York side, and then successfully navigated all her 14 kids to switch sides and kind of like survive the war. But because she was also like super major in charge, she was apparently like the highest ranking lady in all of England behind the queen. And because she was like the queen's BFF at the time, she knew like all these secrets, but we have no idea any of it because history didn't like to report about women at the time. So I like to highlight her. So like why she matters in the fun historical sense. So she's the reason all English royalty are related to mermaids, because she's a descendant of apparently not the Charlemagne, but a different Charlemagne, who is said to be like the son of a mermaid goddess. The lady on your Starbucks cup.
Yeah, Melusine.
Yeah, but it's also like Melusina apparently, and she's like flip-flops between mermaid and siren depending on the lore you read. And apparently that like direct descendant, according to like a long family tree. And so she was able to successfully convince everyone that her second marriage was valid. Everyone tried to get her accused of witchcraft because they're like, she's a mermaid. So, but she got out of it twice. Yay her. And again, she convinced her whole family to like stay in the good graces of whoever was in power. Okay, so now we get to actual Tudor time. So the House of Tudor ran England from 1485 to 1603, which is the 16th century and a little extra. So the rulers included Henry the Seventh, Eighth, Edward the Fourth, Jane, Mary the First, and Elizabeth the First.
Edward the Sixth.
Six wasn't.
No, fifth. Isn't it supposed to be fifth?
No, it's the seventh. Okay, so no, see, there's so many numbers.
And it's supposed to be the fifth.
So Henry the Seventh ended the War of the Roses by marrying Elizabeth of York. Why did he marry Elizabeth of York? because she was of the York side, he was of the Lancaster side. And they killed off everyone else. They were like literally the only people left. To end the war, they just combined the families and became Tudor. So Henry VII was known because he built such a large and prosperous fortune. Like, England has been at war for like over 100 years at this point, so they kind of didn't have anything. But he amassed a fortune equal to 375 million pounds in today's currency. And so Henry had like 1 million kids, and his first son name was Arthur.
1 million kids.
There was like 7.
Yeah, that's not bad.
True.
Yeah.
True, 14, but
14.
So Henry's first son, Arthur, the one Arthur, marries Catherine of Aragon of Spain, but Aragon's a part of Spain now. And Arthur dies a few months later after he got married, and then Henry dies. So who comes next? King Henry VIII, one of the most prolific, famous, we could say,
Yeah.
kings of English history. So Henry was known for being like a lavish person. Apparently lots of pork. That was a very big thing. He had very good feasts. He liked to spend a lot of money. He was also known for being super ruthless. Killed 57,000 to 72,000 people during his reign. He was ambitious and tried to invade everyone, and like everyone. France, Italy, Spain, Ireland, Scotland. Try to go further beyond, but like people kept reeling him in like, you don't have the money. But you kind of do, but you keep spending it on stuff. But, oops, wrong way. The other reason why people know who Henry is because Henry had 6 wives. Who here knows about the wives? Great,
Oh,
cool.
Good.
So if we go through it real fast, over here, not historically accurate costuming, but this is the easiest way to keep. This is the easiest way to keep track of them, I swear. Catherine of Aragon, daughter of Aragon, which is now Spain. Very Catholic family. Her parents funded the Christopher Columbus voyage.
Yes. Isabella Castillo and Ferdinand.
Yeah. They were married for like 22, 21 years. And then he realized that she could not give him a son, the great, great son of an heir. So Anne Boleyn was like her lady in waiting. He liked Anne. And Anne's like, no, we need to be married. And because England was Catholic at the time, divorce was not a thing. So then caused like 7 years of Henry VIII fighting the Pope to get his marriage annulled. And then when that failed, he just decided, we're going to create our own religion.
When in doubt, make your own religion.
And thus the Church of England was born. And so he basically banished Catherine of Aragon and married Anne Boleyn, who after a few years was like, I think you bewitched me. Dead. And that is how he beheaded the first of his 2 wives that he beheaded. But he was also had the eyes of Jane Seymour over here. Jane Seymour was also Anne Boleyn's lady in waiting.
And cousin.
Oh yeah, they were cousins.
First cousins.
They were first?
If I remember correctly, the first.
Okay.
Royalty is a
second?
family business.
Yes. So Jane apparently had a great marriage. It lasted about 9 months because she died like childbirth complications. Then comes Anne of Cleves, who was German, or what was Germany and is Germany today. Yeah.
She was. Yeah.
But Henry was like, ooh, Anne, you look like a horse.
The Habsburg.
And divorced her like almost immediately. But kept her around because she was too important to execute kind of deal. So he didn't want to piss off Germany and have Germany come after him. So Anne of Cleves got her own castle, got a ton of money, and she kind of just hung around for a while. We'll get to that in a minute. Then he turned his eye to Catherine Howard, who was also first cousins with the other 2. But she was kind of being raised in like this orphanage for like royalty that was kind of not super like legitimized. And she was super young.
Pastor Charles. We're kind of there.
She was 17 when she married Henry, and he was like 40 something at the time. And because she was such a prize, lots of suitors happened. And Henry was like, wow, you're cheating on me. Dead. Then we get to the 6th wife, Catherine Parr, who Henry also almost killed because she was a secret Catholic. And he picked out his 7th wife, but then she begged for forgiveness. He forgave her. And then he died himself. And then, so Catherine Parr is known as the one who survived, which, somewhat accurate, but also not the most accurate, because who lasted the longest?
Anna Cleves actually outlived Catherine Parr.
Yep, so the one that was known as divorce actually lived longer than a lot of people.
Yeah, because she was on good terms with Bloody Mary, even though she was not Catholic. But Bloody Mary actually led her funeral processions for Anna Cleves.
Yes. For those who don't know, Mary, Bloody Mary, is Catherine of Aragon's daughter. Her daughter comes in a lot in a second. Anne Boleyn's daughter is Elizabeth I. So remember these two specifically for that stuff, but Anna Cleves is actually the one that survived. Good for her. On to Bloody Mary. So Mary I resents her dad for banishing her mother and decides that when she came into power, to go on a crusade to return England to Catholicism. She kills and tortures hundreds of people, which I think is a great example of misogyny in history because they made her out to be Bloody Mary. When she killed how much compared to her dad? Her dad had a huge spree. She had a few hundred. So that is how she's known as Bloody Mary. And a lot of things that Elizabeth I was praised for was actually stuff Mary started, it turns out. So, potential D&D paths, the reason we're here, because that was a lot of history. If you're looking for family conflicts, just look up the Tudor history. Everyone hated each other for some reason.
And everyone slept with each other.
Yes. Corrupt policies, like Henry VIII created the Act of Retainer, which was, in England, you used to not be able to be executed unless you were in like your sound state of mind, like good to go. So people like either turned insane or pled insanity. Well, the Act of Retainer was like, oh, it doesn't matter if you're insane to the stocks. Mm-hmm. So religious change, if you've got to find religious change, there was so much religious change happening because of Henry. And just mass matrimony. If you need to figure out someone who's just marrying people left and right, serial dater, marriager, great inspiration. Just Google this, pull facts and pieces,
And a great way to get a lot of conflict across a very large amount of land really fast. Because there's nothing that pisses people off more than someone getting divorced and executed.
Yep.
Okay, so now we're in Japan. Yes. Who has played Samurai Warriors? Great. Help me through this. So, Sengoku period. What does that translate to? Does anyone remember? Thank you. So the Warring States, ninjas, and samurais were all happening at the same time. Right. So over here we have Shingen Takeda. And him and... I can never say his name. No. The one on the far right. Kenji Uesugi. Those two really were just trying to unify Japan. Meanwhile, Nobunaga Oda over here, who we have a fabulous cosplayer up here for. Shout out.
Very good cosplay.
Yeah.
Basically, there's so many different clans in Japan happening at the same time, and everyone wants to be in charge. Surprise. So these three guys are really the ones just trying to like gather the other clans, unify them, and win in the end. But sadly, this guy is actually the one that did win, which was like Nobunaga's like the middle guy. Like, I'm not gonna say right-hand man, but he was like very important to Nobunaga. And then once Nobunaga got like assassinated, this guy's like, aha, I win. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is funny because a year later, this guy actually won. Yeah, this is, by the way, the first guy is Hideyoshi Toyomoto. Yeah. And the second guy is Tokugawa. Yeah. And like I said, Japan, there's so many names and people came into power so fast in and out that I could not do all that research. But potential D&D paths, if you want inspiration, look to Japan's like Warring States period, how to unify a country, how political marriages work, and introducing new technology, because that's when guns got introduced to Japan.
Yes.
That's when Christianity got introduced and expelled from Japan.
Yes.
Very quickly.
Yes.
And ninjas. Like, ninjas are awesome.
Who doesn't like ninjas?
All right.
All right. And I'm actually taking over for these next few. We're going to go across the pond a little bit here. We're going to Mesoamerica and South America. Who's ever done any research on like pre-Columbian Americas? Awesome. I'm going to do my best to pronounce these, but it has been a long time since I actually had, someone who really knew how to say them say it around me. So we'll see how it goes. So if we're talking about the 16th century, there's really two that we're going to be talking about. There were a lot of really awesome cultures and civilizations in the Americas at this time, but these are the two that we're going to focus on because don't really have enough time to get into all of them. So the first of them, the Aztec. A lot of people know about the Aztec. They're in central southern Mexico. Mexico City is actually built on top of what was the Aztec capital city of Tenochtitlan. The Aztec, their greatest extent was about 85,000 square miles or so. It was a pretty big swath of land. A lot of people. So the Aztec, as we know it, is like an empire. Was actually originally founded as an alliance, and we'll get into that a little bit more. And one more important term to know for the Aztec is the Huitiatani, who is the ruler, the king, the emperor, if you will, kind of heads the religion and heads matters of state. Going a little bit further south to Peru, the western coast of South America, are the Inca. Now, they had an incredibly massive empire for just anything, really. 770,000 square miles. Population at peak goes anywhere from 6 to 14 million. It's a really big range, but it's for a really good reason. We don't actually know how to read the Incan record system. They didn't actually have a written language per se. Well, they might have in some parts, but the language of the Incans was not something that had a written form. They would actually use strips of textile, and they would basically tie knots and ropes, and the configuration of the knots on each strand of rope tells you how to read it, basically. We don't know how to read them anymore, unfortunately, so we don't know a lot of Incan history. There's some things we know, some things we don't. So the Incans, they were founded more or less in 1438. Capital city of Cusco in southeastern Peru, the same city that's there today, just, built on top of. And the monarch for the Inca is going to be the Sapa Inca. They're going to be important in a little bit. So we'll start with the Aztec. So the Aztec, founded as an alliance between three different city-states, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan, in 1428. So originally they were all equal, we're all going to agree, we're going to band together, we'll have security, we'll combine our military might, we'll share wealth, it'll be great. As it turns out, the person with the military might very quickly took precedence, because if you can force the wealth out of the other people, whoops. So they did expand very quickly. What started out as a small cluster around Mexico City spread all the way out. They didn't go all the way up the Yucatan Peninsula, but they certainly went down the southwestern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula within about 100 years. It got pretty big pretty fast. And again, the Huitiatani is a very important person, their ruler. Here's an approximate map. So we've got Mexico City, well, what is Mexico City nowadays, right around here, around this lake. So they started here. Within 100 years, they're more or less controlling, stabilizing most of central and southeastern Mexico. All right. The nobility and the elite had a lot of political infighting. So it was originally the city-state of Tenochtitlan. They were the ones who ended up taking precedence. It was their noble family that, more or less rose to kingdom and so on and so forth. That being said, whenever one of them died, immediate fights over succession. Like, incredible amount of strife. There were rebellions immediately all across as people were trying to get away from the Aztec Empire. Didn't usually work out for reasons we'll get into in a minute. And immediately afterwards, once a new Huititani was chosen, coronation wars. They had a tradition of going out after someone was chosen as ruler and just bulldozing through a new area and adding it to their empire, which is part of how they got so big so fast. That being said, if you are the Huititani, you are not guaranteed to live a long and happy life. So right here we have the 3 last Huititani before the Spanish arrived, and of them we have 2 deaths by poisoning. Well, 1 death by poisoning, 1 death by a mysterious wasting disease. It was poison. And we have someone who got hit in the head by a rock. Poison? Not yet. Not yet. Wait, not yet. We'll get there. So, the Aztec. Part of how they got so wealthy also and funded all of this military expansion was they demanded tribute from every place that they conquered in the form more or less of taxes. So we have all of this wealth flowing into Tenochtitlan. We have all of this wealth accumulating right at the top. We've got them bringing in food and animal goods, gems, jewelry, and art. They have fantastic art. If you ever get the chance to look at it, look at some of the Aztec art. Phenomenal. They would also bring in people, both for doing hard labor, filling military quotas, but also for human sacrifice. A large part of their religion was being sacrificed, for your gods. It was viewed as a very honorable, noble thing. It wasn't, oh, alas, you're being killed. It was, well, sometimes it was. Depended on who was doing the sacrificing and why. But it was also a noble thing that you could do. So with all of this, all of your wealth is being pulled away. You've got your family members being pulled away from you. Not everyone was happy under the Aztec Empire. Not everyone was happy with their rule. So some of these people that were unhappy, some of them were able to muster an army and fight back or do little skirmishes. A lot of them were not. You just had discontent masses all across. And with that comes enemy states. Of the people who were unhappy, we've got a lot of territories. So Tlaxcala, the one on top here, they're very important. Remember them. Totonac, they're important as well. And then down here at the bottom, actually, we have Texcoco, which is actually one of the 3 founding city-states of the Triple Alliance. They realized, wait a second, I thought this was supposed to be an equal relationship, and it is certainly not. So they kind of get a little unhappy with it, and they start, kind of starting fighting back. So we'll get to that a little bit later, how they start fighting back. But how would you use the general political landscape of the Aztecs in D&D? So if you have, say, a group of freedom fighters, you want your people to not be under the rule of these people who you view as despotic and excessive. You want to free your land from them again. You'll have just a massive population that's just unhappy. They're unhappy with all the taxes. They're little skirmishes here and there against a much more powerful enemy. Or you could view it as someone who's defending the peace. You're protecting the rule as it is because you're fighting for stability. That is one thing that the Aztec Empire did bring. It wasn't all bad. If you were in an area that was, content, didn't have a lot of unrest, it was very stable. It was relatively safe. you did have a lot of wealth funneling out, but you also did have, if there was a crisis, you had food coming in. If you had, a famine, you could get that political support. So it's a lot of ground to play around for, your characters. Are you going to fight for freedom, or are you going to try and protect the order? And so we're going to move on to the Incas real fast. There is a big elephant in the room, and we will get to it in a little bit. It's a very big elephant, and it tramples everything. So, the Inca, they're in South America. By the end of their empire, they stretch over 3,400 miles. It is an absolutely massive, really long spaghetti string empire. They are, by population and by landmass, the largest pre-Columbian civilization in North America. They're massive, and they are incredibly wealthy, and not always happy. Again, no one's ever really happy completely as this nation. But, so, the Incan Empire, they're another one that grew very quickly. They started out 1438, 100 years later, 3,400 miles of territory. Big place. So, privilege and power. So the Sapa Inca, who was the ruler of the Inca, was believed to be directly descended from the sun god. So a lot of power. People genuinely believe they would go and, this is a man to be worshipped. He is divine. And so with that, imagine that wealth and tribute system kicked up to 10. You are going to give everything because this is your representative of God on earth. However, if you have all of this wealth and prestige and power being funneled to one person, if that one person dies, everybody wants in on the pie. So fights. So, for example, we have the death of Huayna Capac in 1527. No chosen line of succession. We'll get there in a second. Really big thing happened after that. Topa Inca, who died in 1493, poisoned after changing who he chose as his successor. It's time. And it opens a YouTube link. Do we get an ad?
Probably.
We get an ad. Who needs an oil change?
Actually, me. Yeah.
I actually do too. Hey, look, it's opening multiple instances. You get the point. It's the poison for Cusco. Cusco's poison. We got there. All right. So remember how I said that one guy died and his chosen successor was dead as well? Would you believe me if I said that started a civil war? Whoa, incredible. I can't believe it. So we're still talking 1482. Well, that date's wrong. It's 1528 he dies. I wrote down the wrong date. 1528, he dies of smallpox. His chosen heir dies of smallpox at about the same time. And suddenly chaos. So there's two brothers. They are his direct sons. We have Huascar. Depends on how you write it, depends on who you're talking to. And we have Atahualpa. So, Huascar, supported by the nobility. He is a pure-blooded Inca. Towards the end of the Incan Empire, we had a lot of, divine right. Well, we got to keep the blood pure, so we're going to marry brother to sister, brother to sister, brother to sister. Everybody's very closely related. So Huascar is a pure-blooded Inca. And as we get ready for our civil war, supported by 400,000 troops, he's got a lot of people who like him. Atahualpa, on the other hand, he is viewed by the people around him as a much more reasonable, much less impetuous, prone to chopping your head off or sending you to go be executed. He's much less likely to do that, at least according to the records that we have. Could be different, we don't know anymore. He is disliked by the nobility because he is not one of the purebred Incan people. His mother was from very influential city-states south. He he started out with 100,000 troops supporting him, so sounds a little uneven. Let's see how it goes. So, Huascar was initially crowned as the king, or as the Sapa Inca. He had the divine right. Everything was set up for him. Here we go. So, Atahualpa controls a lot of land to the north. And he's like, whatever, as it goes. He sends tribute up to Huascar, and Huascar gets this idea in his head. I don't trust that man. He's a traitor. He's going to betray me. So he kills everyone who Atahualpa sent to deliver his tribute, except for one or two managed to get away, and declares to the nation, Atahualpa is a traitor. Do not trust him. Persona non grata. Here we go. Atahualpa hears this and goes, all right, the glove has been dropped. Here we go. Let's declare war. So Atahualpa starts his whole new capital city up in the north, and several of Huascar's generals actually do defect up to Atahualpa because they think Atahualpa probably not going to kill us. Great idea, let's go up to him. Fighting starts, does not go well for Atahualpa at first. During their first major skirmish, Atahualpa captured. Oh no, it's over, here we go. Not. During the celebrations, the very first night that Atahualpa is in captivity, they had alcohol, they had women. One of the women sneaks into the prison where Atahualpa was being kept and frees him, and he manages to sneak away. Uh-oh, now we got a problem. So Atahualpa gets away, he manages to get back to his army, and even though he's outnumbered 4-1, manages to push Huascar and all of his people further back south. They push, and he is apparently a really good general, because with 100,000 people, he's pushing back this army like nobody's business. So Atahualpa ends up, he has at least 250,000 men by the time the Civil War ends. And they push back all the way, they're 20 miles from Cusco, they're 20 miles from more or less game over. Now Huascar is in panic mode. He's got very little left. All right, it's time to retreat. We will recoup. We'll come back. It'll be okay. I'm the son of God. I'll be fine. One of Atahualpa's generals realizes they're probably going to retreat. They're not going to stay here. They're going to get out. Anticipates it, captures them before they can even get anywhere out of the way. And Huascar's troops are routed. Huascar is captured. Atahualpa more or less has it. He declares himself to be the Sapa Inca, and there it goes. In about 4 years, all of this happens. So, with Huascar's capture, the Incan Civil War comes to an end, and Atahualpa crowned as Sapa Inca. So how would you use something like this for Civil War? People love war stories. War stories are great. What I like to think about is, how would this affect the world at large? Not everybody is going to be directly involved in a conflict. You're going to have people who are living their normal everyday lives, farming. You still need food. So what are they going to be thinking about this? What are they going to be talking about in their taverns, rest houses, anywhere? You're going to have merchants complaining about higher prices because it's hard to transport things when there's a chance it's going to get raided. Will there be discourse about who's right, who's wrong? I support this guy, tavern brawl. How's it going to affect actual travelers? Maybe your party is on the road and they are stopped by a group of soldiers who thinks that they're, sneaking information to the other side. There's a lot of little things that you can do. And you can also do things like, your party are soldiers for one of the sides, and what do they think about it? Do they actually believe what they're fighting for? Is there a lot of motivation? Or do we think that, maybe we can actually take a section of these troops who don't really want to be here and we can change sides? There's a lot that you can do. How would your people react to being in the middle of a civil war? But wait, there's more. So the Civil War is finished, and up with the Aztecs. Suddenly, everything changes. The conquistadors arrive. 15th century. So, 1519, pardon me. The conquistadors arrive In the Yucatan Peninsula, Hernan Cortez arrives and makes his way up to the Aztec lands. He's got 600 people with him. Just, a very large traveling party. They're exploring. They're trying to find things for the Spanish king. They've got guns. They have horses. They have cannons. So Cortez is making alliances with people left and right. You support us. We won't really do anything too bad to you, is what they were saying. So by the time that Cortez meets with Montezuma II, who's the Huituitani at the time, he has actually met, interacted with, and made alliances with a lot of the Aztecs' political rivals. I wonder how that's going to go. Meanwhile, when the conquistadors meet the Inca, 1532, literally the day after Huáscar is captured and Atahualpa crowns himself as Sapa Inca, Francisco Pizarro comes out of the countryside where he'd been sitting with his 100 and some men watching the Civil War. Francisco Pizarro comes up and says, "Let's have a meeting. Let's talk." That one, I will tell you right now, does not go well at all. But let's talk about the Aztec first. Let's talk about Cortez. So, very quickly, at first, they try to make an alliance as it goes, but Cortez decides, you know what, no, I think you have more value to me as a political prisoner. Takes Montezuma II captive. Now, Montezuma II, he is still allowed his political influence. He's allowed to rule his kingdom, but he has to do it from under the purview of the Spanish. So there's a lot of concessions being made, a lot of things that a lot of people really aren't that happy about because people just didn't really seem to like the conquistadors. There's a good reason for that. They didn't get along very well. So the Aztec very quickly rebel against the new order. While trying to quell the rebellion, Montezuma II is killed during this altercation. He's the one who gets hit in the head by a rock. Whoops. So after a period of rising tensions and small skirmishes, Cortez actually marches on Tenochtitlan, and with him he brings all of the political rivals he met along the way. All of those people that the Aztec had made unhappy. Well, here's your chance. Tenochtitlan falls and is raised in 1521. Mexico City is founded and actually built on the foundations of the old city. There are a lot of really cool archaeological sites in Mexico City if you ever get the chance. But for our purposes, 1500s, there is a puppet government that's installed, and as with colonization, political, cultural, and religious control is very quickly established by the Spanish. The Aztec, as we know them, they do not exist anymore. Moving further south, the Inca, Francisco Pizarro. This actually goes... The other one was bad. This is worse. Pizarro takes advantage of the weakened armies and unstable power dynamic with Atahualpa and his armies and all of his nobles. Captures Atahualpa after killing over 7,000 of his men. Pizarro had 168 men. Guns, cannons, horses. Managed to ambush him in a city street, unable to get away. It was a bloodbath. So Pizarro demands ransom from the Inca in exchange for Atahualpa's release. I believe it was you have to fill I think something about a 12 square foot room full of gold, silver, and other valuables, one time for each, and then we will let him go. Decides not to honor his arrangement after he's been paid. Really scummy. So Atahualpa, he sees the writing on the wall. He's like, okay, this isn't going to go well. Pizarro decides that he is going to decide between the two. He now has control of Huáscar and Atahualpa. He is going to speak with each of them, and he is going to decide who would be better for Spanish interests to be in charge. Atahualpa gets wind of this, and he has his brother Huáscar executed in order to maintain his power. He thinks it'll help. Pizarro decides that this is a great opportunity to just have Atahualpa killed and just not worry about it. So within a little bit more time, there's a faction of the Inca Empire that managed to separate and preserve itself for about 40 more years until 1572, but they were quickly overthrown once the Spanish actually turned their eyes onto them. So we are still talking about D&D. How do you use this for D&D? There is a big asterisk. I will get to that. So foreign invasion. You are under assault by a force that is much more powerful than you are, much more technologically advanced just because of what was available at the time. So you're fighting to preserve your way of life. You're discovering a new strange enemy. Maybe you could spin it as maybe they aren't quite hostile and it's an interesting cultural exchange is what we all hope for. Or you could have the spin of you're exploring somewhere new and you're encountering new people and you're seeing different ways of life. None of this excuses genocide. Genocide is terrible. What happened is really bad. But if you have to spin something that ends the way it does, there are ways to do it. You just have to be careful to not, well, genocide's cool. Don't do that. But yeah, there's a lot of real estate in Mesoamerican and South American history for ideas for a D&D campaign. It can be fun. You just have to be aware of how it ends.
All right, so now we move on to the Ottoman Empire, specifically the Magnificent Century. So the Magnificent Century was the Ottoman Empire, and some of the big highlights was that was a great expansion. They gained 877,888 square miles, and they became a dominant naval force in the world. Okay, so the whole reason why the Magnificent Century is called that is kind of because of Suleiman the Magnificent over there. He was revered in history as a pinnacle of the Ottoman sultans, and that image was created by writers that he had under his pay before he died. So if I have money, if I have power, if I want to be known in history, what am I going to do? You're going to praise me. And that only started to get re-examined by the 1980s, or 40 years ago?
About.
Yeah. But so far, they've been searching through, and they're like, some of this stuff isn't actually that far off. They prospered. It was magnificent. Suleiman also built grand architecture, such as the Mimar Sinan. If I'm saying it wrong, I'm super sorry. Cultivated grand arts, such as literature, art, theology, philosophy. Suleiman was also quoted by Shakespeare, it turns out. I forget which work, but yeah. And he surprisingly is one of the 23 relief portraits over the gallery doors of the Chamber of Commerce at the Capitol building, 5 miles away. And those people are noted for their work in establishing the principles that underline our American law. Oh, that was presumptuous. The American law. Everyone here doesn't have to be American. So yeah, Suleiman. A lot of stuff going on. Something fascinating that I found about the Ottoman Empire is the race of succession. So this is one of the things I found most interesting when I was learning about it. So sultans typically did not take a wife, but instead he had his harem, and each concubine was, quote, active until she bore a son, and then she'd be retired of her concubine duty. She'd still be around, but more of a mother figure. She's around. Hey, how you doing kind of deal. And once that son would reach kind of adulthood, quote, quote, of the time period, the Sultan would place him and his mother to rule a part of the Ottoman Empire. Oh, hey, you handle this district over here. You handle that area over here. And when the Sultan dies, there's no clear successor. It's a race. All the sons have to race back to Istanbul, where basically first one that gets back wins.
Pretty much, yeah.
And one of the laws that was created a few sultans back was they did not want all the civil wars that all these other countries we're talking about. So once you are the first one back, it is now your job to commit fratricide, which is kill all your siblings.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it wasn't super bloody. They just choked you with a bowstring. That's how the royalty died, because you're not supposed to shed royal blood.
Right.
So it wasn't as bloody. But it did get revoked later on because it got a little messy when like 26 people died.
Yeah.
And people were not happy seeing 26 coffins of children.
Right. Because age did not matter. It just mattered if
Yeah.
you had a claim.
Yep. So you could have been a baby, and they're like, nope, you're gone.
Yes. Actually, so apparently there
You
were
could
some
try.
people that attempted to like flee the country that was like, I don't want it, bye. But they would like hunt you down.
Yeah, and then because they were gaining so much territory, they were just like, take them, they're here. And so they would just sacrifice them, basically. It's like, nope, they're here, take them. Leave us alone. We're
Yeah.
fine. We're going to do this in peace.
Okay, I don't know specifically, but I know there was one.
Yeah, I was like,
Mostly
that-
because New Orleans is throwing me off. I'm super tired. But yeah, no, there was a huge massacre. Like there was like what, 26 coffins like the next day. Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, but they really didn't have civil war, so in a way, someone's philosophy somewhat worked. One of the other huge prominent figures I like to point out, because again, we don't get to hear a lot about like women in history because people thought they were not fascinating enough, but they kind of were. So Harem Sultana was one of the most controversial figures in royal history in the world. So she was born in Ruthenia, which was Poland at the time, but was captured and taken to Istanbul, where she entered the imperial harem, where she became a favored concubine and was the first woman to become a legal wife to a sultan and thus an empress in centuries. Yeah, and Suleiman the Magnificent forsaked all other women, basically kind of abandoned his harem at the time.
Yeah, he had one other who was the favorite concubine because she bore him a son that lived. And her name is Mahi Devran. And so she was the favorite, but Harem, her original name was Roxolana, but then she basically wormed her way into the heart of the Sultan. And so she was given a name when she converted from Catholicism to Islam. And then that's how she got the name Harem, because the Sultan gave it to her personally. It started a whole conflict. She bore him, 5-6 sons and 1 daughter, which originally the first one that they had was a son. Once you have a son, that's usually it. But she convinced him to not sleep with any other women, to basically send away any Poland or Russian slaves that he had or concubines. And so that's what he did. That also started an uproar because she was messing up the hierarchy of the harem. And then she managed to, they ended up getting married, which has never happened with the Sultan before, where she became a legal wife and she was no longer a property of the Sultan anymore either. She was a free individual at that point as well.
Started as a slave and made her way up to the top. Like, yes.
There's actually a Turkish soap opera called The Magnificent Century.
Yep.
That's where that's from.
Yep.
If you guys like costume dramas and historically inspired things, the costumes are great.
Yeah, I was like, the costumes are fantastic.
And there's 4 seasons. It is not a short show.
It is not, and the episodes are like, some of them are like 2.5 hours, so it's like a movie, but it does not have a clean cutoff, I will warn you. There is no like clean cutoff where like, this is the end of like season 1, or this is the end of one plot. No, they just hook you on that end.
Kind of like Lord of the Rings, how it just ends.
Yeah, so just warning, if you start it, you kind of just got to go with it.
But yeah, so she was also, when she was empress and actually had the power, she built like amazing bathhouses and actually apparently really took care of the people, like
Yeah.
at least in
She
at
did a
least
lot
in
of charity
Istanbul,
work.
but I think the Ottoman Empire as a whole. And
Yeah, schools, bathhouses she did for the country. So she did a lot of charity work, honestly, and she made a lot of political moves, not just for her sons, but she also helped create like some kind of treaties and alliances that Suleiman wouldn't have originally thought of or thought like given too much thought into, because the advisors weren't too for it. But she's like, some of these are kind of like my people. So
Yeah, she was very active, and she actually started a whole, like, I forgot what they were called, but there was a bunch of, like, empresses after her.
the Sultanated woman,
Yeah, that's it. And just, like, she was the
the first.
trendsetter of empresses having a lot of power in the Ottoman Empire. Yay her. Okay, but again, how does this relate to D&D? So, if you need a campaign about how to please a specific ruler, this is an excellent, like, thing to look into, because my god, they all had to please Suleiman. If you ever watch Marco Polo, a few centuries before this, but that is another, like, please don't kill me, just do well. A lot of fetch quests for arts, basically like side quests, because like they really did like expand a ton of like culture, art, and if you just like, if you go to the Wikipedia page, you'll see like all the things like they created. Click, how is this done? Wow, they made it out of blank. Great, that's your quest. Go find this material to come back, and then we can start building this. You'll see it later on in your campaign that it's done. Games of succession. I'm not saying you have to have like whole patricide thing that we talked about, but succession, kind of interesting. And controversial rises to power. You could have a character like Harem that really just got her way to the top, but again, how do the people feel about it? How would your characters feel about it? Is someone else like, I'm so sick of her, let's get rid of her? Or him? Or them? Who knows? So there's actually a lot of other things that we just did not have time to create whole slides on that were happening in the century. So Roanoke, the colony of Virginia, the one that got lost, was founded in 1585. Ferdinand Magellan and Juan Sebastian Elcano led the first circumnavigation of the world in 1519 to 1522. Japan got guns from Portugal. I didn't know it was from Portugal, actually. I knew they got guns, but Portugal, hey. Copernicus realizes that we revolve around the sun, so you could have that whole thing, like conspiracy theorists trying to say that we have followed the sun's not around us. The Gregorian calendar began in this century, which I thought was surprising. I thought it came from the Greeks, but I was wrong. And opera was invented at the very end of the century. I thought opera would have been out like way longer. And as I was doing research, apparently Kabuki theater started after this century too. I thought it would have been right before, but it was like 1603 and thus not eligible for this panel. But so some of you said you were forever DMs, or if you're not forever DM, just DMing. Is anyone in a pickle right now? Because we would love to help in their own campaigns. What's up?
I'm working on creating a campaign based around like town building.
Town building?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to have one central kingdom with 3 rolled over areas, and the players will try to overthrow each of the areas before getting to the final destination. Any tips on what I should take from that?
All right, I'm just going to repeat your question too so that the video people, when they watch it on YouTube later, know. So our friend's campaign back there, it's like 3 different territories, and they're going to like build the town and like kind of take over to like unify. And they were asking, do we got any tips or plot lines or fun things to throw at?
Follow the Aztecs.
Yeah. I think, like Milana said, following like maybe the Aztec way of, okay, who's got the military power? If it's your players, then have them like go one by one, trying to conquer these places. Something really interesting about the way that the Aztecs like conquered was they offered stability and they offered security as far as food and everything. They did demand tribute, but beyond that, they genuinely didn't really care as long as you met your obligations. You could still be your own city, you could be your own civilization, have your own beliefs. The Aztecs had a very wide pantheon of deities that they were okay with as long as you met the minimum criteria of offering, like people with sacrifices, trade goods, things like that. So maybe make it a case of we offer you security, we offer you a military presence in case you are in need of assistance, as long as you help us in turn. Maybe that would be a good way to, I don't know, maybe convince the people that you are trying to interact with to follow along with you as well, instead of just, I'm going to kill 90% of your population and what's left is going to be mine.
Also, I know we didn't dive into it a ton, but like the whole Warring States era, like nonstop, that was everyone.
Yeah.
Until someone finally won, barely within this century, actually. It was like 1597
Yeah.
when Japan got unified, so almost had to cut that out because it didn't make it.
Nope.
But that was a good question, actually. Anyone else have any D&D questions, pickles? Yes.
So, how do you incorporate any of this while, all right, let me phrase this right.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to totally gloss over some of the atrocities happening at this time, because that's kind of, disrespectful, and these things don't happen.
100%.
Things happen. But at the same time, you don't want a whole campaign based around sexism, anti-Semitism, and slavery, and, colonialist genocide. So how do you thread that needle?
It is a really hard line to walk, because it's, like I was saying with the Aztec and the Inca, fantastic civilizations. You want to talk about them, but you have to address, sometimes history is exciting, sometimes history is an absolute tragedy, and not, not great.
Well, then you can also spin it like how the Magnificent Century kind of spun, like even though Harem was like a slave and there was the invasions, Solomon still did a lot of really good political moves that created treaties, obtained wealth and stuff like that to secure and stabilize a country. And so he did that, like stuff like that. So even though there was some negative stuff going on, like invasion, so people were losing their homes, there was still slavery, but people still rose above it. Like Solomon's right-hand man, Ibrahim Pasha, he was a slave originally as well, but he also rose from a low status to being the right-hand man. So you could always spin it in a way so that people can make political moves to make things better, to shift things around, where even though these things are still happening and they are still sad and tragedies, that there are ways to make it into a brighter situation, kind of. So there are ways to kind of shift it.
Oh, and also what I like to do is I like to change the sides. Just Incas won. Congrats. How'd you do it? Or just like be like, hey, matricidal government culture that, hey, ladies are in charge. Figure it out. Fight your way up, men. Like you could always, like, you don't have to take everything like as literal as history spun it. You could always just like take the idea, flip it. Congrats. We just subverted oppression.
And I also like to, it would also be a really good opportunity to, bring up the plot point and then maybe later on, talk to your players and be like, so this is actually something that, did happen. And, you can use it as a learning opportunity and be like, well, it did end this way in real life, but let's see where we can take it. Just, learning opportunity, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Also, your players control that story too as much as you do. Feel free to point it out to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, we don't have to be as bad as history was.
Mm-hmm.
Let's try to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this guy had his hands up for a while.
We had-
No, the guy with the black shirt, red bandana.
I'll remember you too.
So, I'm going to be working on a campaign pretty soon that I'm trying to come up with a sort of decent plot for it, and I do like the idea of using past political conflict for that. But how well do you think such a story would scale down to, like, say, within a single city-state? Like, do you think these are decently scalable kind of things?
Oh, yeah. One thing that you can always do, we like to talk about like the really big things in history. We like to talk about, the Incas were the largest pre-Columbian civilization in the North Americas, the Americas, pardon me. But there were tiny little cities inside each of those. And you have to think about, well, what would, Joe and his farm be thinking about, but I mean, also, I'm going to pull from the Incas again. This isn't something that I managed to fit into the main part of it, but the way that their system of like taxation and tribute worked actually scaled down to like the small city level. You had like government representatives. They actually scaled it so that the people who were like doing taxes and everything, it started out on a scale of 10 people, then 50 people, then 100 people, then 500 people. And so you have these, and all of these government representatives are actually members of like the Sapa Incas family. And so you do have like representatives of the royalty there. They might not be, like the brother, he might be, the third cousin once removed, but still you've got a tie up to the main power structure. And so it's, and there can also be a lot that happens with a very few amount of people. You can absolutely do like small amounts of people having a really big conflict. Think about mountain people in West Virginia. They get really angry and they will hold a grudge for generations. Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of like to boil all the conflict we talked about down to and like the intricacies of history, family fights, money, power. That could happen at any level of political or even just like friend groups. Let's be real. Mm-hmm. We've all had friends fight like that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And I know I saw your hand up.
So how do you handle the escalation of events, like for the Tudor Wars? Like, was it a number of things that just kind of piled up of like, oh, he insulted me, and then we didn't get what we wanted, and now I'm going to kill him? Or was it like one pivotal event that just instantly flipped everything across?
That's a great question.
If I remember correctly, it seems like it was mainly like the pivotal event of losing the territory in France, and then when the one king died, it was a matter of who was going to succeed him, and that's when that's when the Plantagenets split into the Lancasters and the Yorks. So it kind of, and then it just trickled on to who's the rightful ruler based off of their heritage and all that, and that's also one of the reasons why Henry VIII wanted Calais back so badly. Because he wanted to have an accomplishment like how his father defeated the Yorks and then united the two houses again. So it kind of could just be like one thing. It could be something snowballing, but for the Tudors, I know from what I can remember, it was mainly that like two events, and then it just continued on for too long, way too long.
And there's a lot to be said for pettiness and grudges as well. Like, think about it also. Like, when you're thinking about these, you can also think about it, like, on a personal scale. I'm not saying kill your boss. I am not. But think about your job. Like, what would lead you to leave your job? It's usually, maybe you're unhappy with the hours or something. You've got a lot of these small little things that really start to bother you. And over time, it just builds up this festering grudge and this simmering resentment. Maybe you've got the Aztec or the Inca, and you've got these people who've had, maybe they haven't had, the big famine or whatever. And so what they're seeing is this percentage of all the food that they're making is disappearing. Joe just got taken to the capital city. He's going to be sacrificed. That's cool and, honorable for him to do, but he's our family. We don't want to see him go. And you start to, feel this deep-seated hatred and resentment. And finally, someone comes along and says, hey, did you hear that those weird, like, Martian shell men are, like, they're saying that they're going to take out the Incas, or they're going to take out the Aztecs. Well, get me involved. I want to go. I hate these guys. And just, one thing like tips you over and you're like, yeah, I could do this. You might think to yourself, oh, it's bad now. It couldn't possibly get any worse. And history proves us wrong sometimes, often, very frequently. But use little things like that, what might people be thinking in their day-to-day life? I like the government because of this, this, and this, but I hate the government because, they keep sending me red light tickets when I didn't run the red light. Little things.
All right. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask, but I just wanted to point out that we do have a website, Reframe, reframecons.wordpress.com. And if you like me blabbing about stuff, I have a podcast, and that's a QR code to the link tree where you can find it on your thing. I'm not talking about history, people. I'm just talking to other people about why they're awesome and cool.
You are talking to the star of Birdemic 3.
Oh, yes. Who here knows Birdemic? Yeah, the guy starring in the third movie came on my show. We're going to release this episode when they release the movie in July, though, but oh my God, so exciting. They just announced the fourth one, too, which I think is hilarious because the third one has had 4 world premieres now, and you still can't find it anywhere because they haven't released it. But yeah, so I get random people on that podcast, and I just find out why people are fascinating, because everyone is. I'll have a local artist come on. Actually, I record that tomorrow. So yeah, I've had accountants. I've had people that own music studios. Lots of TikTok stars like to get on, which is fine. They bring their followers. And yeah, thank you for coming. Feel free to ask questions and have a great rest of your MAGFest for 2 hours.